And thank you for joining me once again for another ARiSE Day seminar. Um, there's a lot of talk right now. Certainly, if you go online and you read articles, or if you talk to people, or I'm assuming if you listen to the news, I try my best not to listen to televised news anymore. There's a lot of hype, or a lot of fear, or a lot of certainly a lot of negativity around housing prices at the moment. And there's a lot of fear that rising interest rates, are going to result, or have already resulted in, falling property values. And that investors and homeowners alike are going to get burned on the loss of value to their property as a result of these price fluctuations. I guess I would like to address some of these concerns. It's being referred to as the housing market collapse. It's being compared to 2007. I think it was, is it Standards and Poor's? No, it's not Standards and Poor's. It is, did I leave the tab open? I did not. But the major real estate index in the United States there, I forget what it is. It's not Standard and Poor's, but it's something with an S, has fallen. That index has fallen the fastest it has since they began indexing real estate prices in the United States, probably 40 or 60 years ago, maybe longer. And so there is a sense among some people of panic, of fear, and certainly of inaction. Is that the right term? People are afraid, and they are worried that they will lose money, and they're being induced to inaction, which I think is very fascinating, very interesting phenomenon, the way that works, because it doesn't quite seem like the timing is correct, but we'll dig into it a little bit and we'll look at it. So I've got some notes. Here. I'm just pulling them up here. Sorry. So there's also a lot of talk about a recession, and the talk varies. There are recession fears, there are recession believers, and there are recession doomsayers. I would say those are the three major categories of recession talk. So I myself fall in the first category, recession fears. Recessions are obviously not a good thing. People need their jobs. People need their incomes to feed their families, to pay for food, etc., etc. We know from history, the Great Depression, even 2007, like the dot-com boom, bad things happen to irresponsible people when the economy collapses. And, I don't consider myself an irresponsible person, so probably terrible things probably won't happen to me, but they do happen, and it's sad, and we'd prefer, that life isn't more difficult for people. I think that's recession fears. We also have the recession doomsayers. The sky is falling, the world is going to end. This is the big one. Talking about the Fed and the Bank of Canada and inflation and And I think those people have perhaps more. I think that those people are perhaps more aware of the machinery of how our financial system works, right? And are therefore more able to see the cracks in the system, see the problems, the flaws in our financial system. But they don't do a good job, I guess, contextualizing the theory, right? It's easy to say that when the government prints money, that's bad for the economy. It's easy to say, and it's true. Absolutely. But it is not necessarily easy to predict how that quote unquote badness, right? That quote unquote badness is going to manifest itself in the economy. One of the fascinating things about economic history is that time and time again, we make the same mistake because we're not nearly as smart as we like to tell ourselves that we are, and we actually continually repeat past mistakes. And printing money is one that it's a loop that we've, as a civilization, been stuck in for at least 5,000 to 8,000 years. So it's something that we just keep doing over and over again. And when we do, we get different outcomes all the time. There have been periods not that long ago where nations like Germany, the Weimar Republic, if you're familiar with it, that's Germany post World War I, but pre World War II. They're going nuts with hyperinflation and all this stuff as a result of some of the, Treaty of Versailles policies, as well as the economic policies of the German government at that time to try and deal with the Treaty of Versailles. And their society went nuts. Totally crazy. Obviously, we know about the Nazis and all of that, but that was a reaction to what was initially a great liberalization of their society, including a lot of very similar stuff with the whole transgender, homosexual, sexual liberation kind of stuff that we're seeing in our society now. I think at the time, people used to refer to that kind of behavior as decadence. Right? It is behavior that is not befitting of people who are working hard trying to survive, right? It's behavior that only really makes sense when all of your needs are taken care of and you are not worried about the privations of life. Then you worry about these things, right? Hence decadent. And it's not a judgment call. I'm just identifying and looking at it the way it has been looked at previously, and I mean, the way that these things are still today. And that's obviously a little concerning. Obviously, we're watching a man with dementia and a country that's very confused stumble their way into potential World War III with Russia. And that's probably alarming for everybody. We can all take solace, though, in knowing that we have no power to control or influence the outcome. So just kind of leave that one alone. Hope for the best. Right. So those are recession doomsayers, right? The people who are really, the sky is falling, the world is going to end, the housing market is going to go to zero or something like that. And then, there are just the doom and gloom people who maybe they're not doomsayers. They're not convinced that the sky is falling or that the world is ending. But there's a recession. Times are tough. People can't afford things, and they can't see a way out. Fair. Those are all fair and valid concerns. And unfortunately, it looks like we're in a recession. I'm pretty confident we are in a recession. To the best of my knowledge, we still don't actually have any official acknowledgement of this recession, but unfortunately, I place less and less value on the official designation or response to things by the month. So, you take that for what it is. I've been rewatching The Wire. I don't know if you've ever seen the show The Wire on HBO. HBO doesn't seem to make particularly high quality television anymore. There was a time when, they were making so many of the greatest television shows, The Wire, Entourage, Sex and the City, on and on and on. And today, people still love Game of Thrones, and there might be one or two other shows, but a lot of their shows, they've become very political and not nearly as good. But I'm rewatching The Wire anyways. And in The Wire, they've got this expression. If you've never seen the show, do yourself a favor and watch it. It's fantastic. I mean, it's a little dry. It's not the most exciting show in the world. It's not like a thriller. You're not going to be on the edge of your seat. It's not action-packed, but it is raw and grounded and realistic, as much as, something of that nature can be. Absolutely fantastic. Anyways, they have this expression, this term, juking the stats. Juking the stats. I guess it's an American thing. I don't know. But in the show, in the context of the show, juking the stats is when city officials of one kind or another, be they police officers or school board trustees or the mayor's office or teachers union, take statistics that are supposed to be used to measure performance and then play around with those statistics to give the appearance of performance without having actually performed. Right. So the perfect example of juking stats is taking a robbery, right? Somebody goes into a store with a gun, robs a store, and writing it up as a police officer as a larceny, right? Which would be somebody goes in and they take a bunch of stuff, no weapons involved, right? So obviously larceny is a lower charge than robbery, right? And so you would statistically, right, from a crime stat perspective, since a larceny ranks lower than a robbery, you could make the argument that there were fewer serious crimes that month or year or statistical period because you didn't record those major crime events. You misclassified them as something other than what they were. Right. So juking the stats. And it's a huge problem in government, period. I mean, it's a problem even in the private sector, but usually you have a boss who cares enough to call you on it because the company needs that information to make decisions and survive. And so companies that don't catch their employees falsifying stats don't survive. But the government has no such corrective measure, right? The bosses are ultimately political figures who want to be reelected, and they get benefits from accepting the lies, right? If I'm running to be the mayor or the premier or something, and I say, hey, crime is down 10%, under my leadership, it doesn't matter whether it really is or whether someone's been juking the stats. If I can say that on the nightly news and I can repeat it often enough, then people may think that I'm going to do a good job or have been doing a good job around that statistical category, right? And so this is juking the stats, and the government is doing this all the time. I mean, again, you get lots of places they're playing with the numbers, right? I mean, investors will juke the stats, right? There are people who are trying to sell properties with inflated, cash flow statements, inflated rental numbers, deflated, right? They're shrinking their costs, pretending, give you pro formas that are from 10 years ago. These are things that happen. People are not always honest, right? And when institutions are not honest, then that's the government juking the stats, right? So they've been juking the stats. It's very hard to know what's going on. From a recession period, we've probably been in one for the better part of this year. There have been ups and downs. It'll be very interesting to see as we head into this wintertime period, just how much and how badly things slow down, if they do, or maybe they'll pick up, right? Well, we'll have to see. Now, as an investor, should this concern you or does this concern me? Honestly, a recession is not something that I'm really afraid of as an investor, if I'm being honest. I mean, if a recession in theory was bad enough, like if we got the Great Depression or something, and it's so hard to even know what the Great Depression was because you got to take the word basically of the media from back in the day on what it was, right? These historical books, who knows just how accurate the accounts are for how bad things were, right? We have to remember that the Great Depression was a time of tremendous suffering for people, and I don't doubt that. But it was also, right at the tail end of the Gilded Age, right? The Great Gatsby and stuff like that. So there were people with awesome wealth having a phenomenal life even during the Great Depression, right? And I think we have this very modern tendency to use statistics and then compare ourselves to the statistics, right? On average and stuff like this, right? And you're not a statistic. Nothing about your life might be average. You might be below average, you might be above average, and how far above or below the average you are is going to make a huge difference in your life. There are 7+ billion people. You as a person who's able to listen to me on the internet, you're already above average, right? And as the internet becomes more and more average, and it's still not that average, right? So only 2.5 to 3 billion people have access to the internet on a regular basis, something like that, right? So that means probably the majority of human beings still don't. You're an above average person in that regard, right? If you're Canadian, for example, you're probably in the top 10% worldwide, right? You're not quote unquote average, right? So average is a very tricky notion. Yes, averages exist. You very rarely want to compare yourself to them. And for the most part, it's almost impossible to be the average, to be honest. The average is a mathematical thing. It's not a reality. It's not a reality thing, right? Pardon me. So, we have to be wary of averages and what they mean for us and how they affect people. In a recession, your quote unquote average person is going to feel some pain. But that doesn't mean every person is going to. So let's dig into the numbers a little bit. So just listening to me ramble on. Pardon me. As of September 2022, so last month, the Canadian average rent had risen. This is for actually, let me just confirm. I believe this is for a single family home. So the Canadian average rent has risen to $2,043 a month as of September last month, 2022. These are the rental rates, right? Annual rental increase. So year on year, since last year, Canadian market rents are up 15.4%. That September figure, $2,043 per month on average, represents a monthly increase in rental prices of 4.3%. I wasn't able to get information for Sudbury, but I do have London. London's average rents increased to $1,810 per one-bedroom unit and $2,184 per two-bedroom unit. That's $2,200 per two-bedroom and $1,800 per one-bedroom. Okay, and I don't have the percentage increase for that, but it should be approximately near that average of 4.3% month on month and 15% year on year. Okay, those are the numbers. So if you're a real estate investor, right, then you already know cash flow is king, right? Your top priority as an investor is to find and collect cash flowing assets. Now, if you had a cash flow income of $100,000 last year, and I'm just using that number because it's easy, right? Round number. Then this year you should have a cash flow figure of $115,400, right? That's how much rents increased. Now, if you think about that, that's a 15% increase on your income, right? Let's just put that in perspective. That is a phenomenal raise, right? If you have a job, you're working at Xerox. I don't know why Xerox, but you're working at Xerox. Excuse me. And they pay you good. I don't know. Say you make $100,000 a year. Let's just say, yeah. And you did good this year. You had a good project. You made some sales, whatever it is you do for Xerox. I don't know. So you go to your boss, your manager, and you say, hey, manager, I'm Aaron. My work's been excellent. I've been, showing up early and doing everything I can to try and get ahead, and I'd like to talk to you about, potentially increasing my income and, getting a raise. they are not going to offer you a 15% raise. People do get them. It does happen. But for the most part, your raise is going to be, 3% cost of living, 5%. Maybe a quite a generous raise in a lot of cases is going to be a 10% bump, right? So right off the bat, your average real estate investor, right? That is anybody who is investing for cash flow, right, and is therefore making money off of the income that their properties generate. They're up 15% on income. Now that is a stark contrast from the headline numbers that we're seeing. Housing prices fall 20%, to fall 20%, to fall 20% further, right? If you look at the headlines, then the sky is falling, the market is crashing, and there's no money to be made. And of course, there isn't money to be made from the simpleton perspective, right? Because the simpleton is looking to win a lottery ticket. The simpleton is looking to get rich quickly on that one deal. Oh, I'm going to do one thing one time, and I'm going to sit on the beach for the rest of my life. And it's a beautiful dream. It's a beautiful dream, but it doesn't really track to reality, right? In reality, what gets you ahead is considered and repeated effort in one direction, striving, right? And so it's not going to be one deal that makes you a millionaire or a financially successful person. Right? It's going to be multiple. So those people are going to lose, right? If you bought a property in, let's say, the fall of 2021 or the summer of 2021, say that, and you are now selling that property today, you've lost money. You're probably down 20%. That's actually accurate, right? Those numbers are probably good, 20 to 30%. So for the short-term person who tried to buy last year and sell this year, you've lost money, probably. And if you bought last year, you're probably losing money anyways, because chances are you were buying for appreciation and price growth, not for cash flow, probably, right? Excuse me. Now, if you bought a property for appreciation that has negative cash flow, that 15% increase in rents has helped to reduce your negative cash flow. So you're losing less money, but you're still losing money, right? Unless you were right on the edge, you're still losing money, right? And if you find yourself in a situation where you need to sell, you need access to that capital for whatever reason, you've lost money on the deal, right? For those of us who take a longer term perspective, right, who are buying assets for their cash flow, thinking about the long term, hoping that this is a thing that's going to put money in our pockets month over month and year over year, rather than just a one-time deal, right? Then there's a very good chance you did not buy in the summer of last year, or if you did, you were buying off or out of market deals that did not experience that kind of price, the kinds of price pressure that we saw on market deals, right? So you look for something off the market that actually still made sense. And if you're buying those, you're still okay. If you were just sitting there taking whatever, the lazy realtors who want the quick sale will throw at you, then you might be hurting off of that decision, right? But the cash flow focused investor is actually seeing an increase in their cash flow. They're seeing an increase in their incomes. They're seeing an increase in their rental receipts, right? And what's really interesting about that from a strategic perspective, right, is that this cash flow is increasing. These incomes for these investors are increasing, and the market is starting to panic and prices are starting to fall. So now the savvy investors who are holding a lot of property, right, and are receiving that cash flow and making it work, are now saving up. I mean, those people are literally shoring up money right now, waiting for, the market to more or less bottom out so that they can pick up a few more properties at a discount and then ride their property value up as they collect the cash flow. right? One of the things about the way the media is portraying the current economic situation we find ourselves in is to go back there, very doom and gloom, right? The world is ending, the sky is falling, the recession is, housing prices are down 30%. How will you ever afford the future? Blah 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 blah. They're there to sell fear, right? Which in turn sells papers or clicks or whatever, and it's super duper toxic what they do. I mean, they don't mean to be toxic, they just are. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, but it's super duper toxic what they do because they're scaring people. They're scaring people into being afraid of investing, being afraid, wanting to sit on the sideline, not wanting to put their money to work in the market. And of course, that's bad for people because for most of us, it's very, very difficult. Unless you're going to be a professional investor, and even for those people, it's very, very challenging. It's just not really possible to time the market. It's just really not. What you want as an investor is exposure to the market. The more exposure you have to the market, then the more you get out of upswings, and the more you lose out of downswings, right? If I have, $1 million on the stock market, sorry, let's use past tense. If I had $1 million on the stock market at the beginning of this year, I now have $700,000 or less because the market is down on average 20-30%, right? I've lost that money. That's exposure to the market. Pardon me. I've lost that money. It's exposure to the market. Now, that money that I've lost on the stock market is not really lost if I don't liquidate my holdings, right? If I bought $1 million worth of stuff that's now worth $700,000, I still have the same amount of stuff. So assuming the price goes back up, then it is what it is, right? But for the time being, I'm down 30%, right? And it's the same with the real estate, right? Like, I own properties that are worth less now than they were summer of last year. It is what it is. Now, if I were some kind of super mega genius, maybe I could have sold them at exactly the right time, which some people did. And I could have held on to that cash, and I could have bought back in at exactly the right time. And, you make a lot of money. Obviously, I'm not a mega genius. I did not do that. Most people are not, because even when you are a mega genius, it is basically impossible to time the market. And the reason it's impossible to time the market is because how smart you are really has nothing to do with timing the market. The market is irrational, right? There is rationality in the market, but the market is also irrational. And as many investors have learned the hard way, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent, which means that trying to accurately predict what the market is going to do is not possible. In exactly the same way that trying to predict what a crazy schizophrenic person might do is not possible, right? Sometimes things are just unpredictable, right? And so this is the trouble with timing the market. But those holdings, which are down this year, admittedly, produce cash flow. So I'm not selling them, right? And that cash flow income is going into the pocket, going into savings, right? Going into my return, right? And as the market recovers, hopefully we'll be able to acquire more property, and then each of those properties will rise, right? Because to go back to my stock market example, if I have $1 million and it goes down 30%, then I'm down to $700,000. Alternatively, if it goes up 20%, I'm now up $200,000, right? And now, what if I have $2 million? Well, now I'm not up $200,000. Now I'm up $400,000, right? And if I have $10 million, now I'm up $2 million, right? So the amount of money I make is proportional to the amount of money that I'm holding at risk, right? The more money that's exposed to the stock market and the more gains the stock market has, the more money that throws off for me. Similarly with real estate, if I have hold on. Let's say I'm a renter. I have 0 houses. I don't pay very much per month because I'm renting. So let's say I pay $2,500 for where I live, and I have $150,000 in the bank. Let's just say, but I don't own any houses. Well, if housing prices are on average, let's say $1 million to keep the math easy, and I can more or less afford one because I've got about $150,000 in the bank. I pay $2,500 a month. I can approximately afford to own a house if I want to, but I choose not to. I choose to rent. If the housing market increases by 20% over the next 5 years while I'm renting, then that will on average have been $40,000 a year or $200,000 total of wealth or income that I will have missed out on by renting instead of owning, because I was not a part of the market and I did not feel the effects of the increasing market, right? Likewise, let's say I am a property owner. I own one house, that $1 million house. The property market goes up 20%. I've now realized that $40,000 a year or that $200,000 return gain, etc. Right? And now we can multiply that further. If I have 5 houses that are each worth $1 million and we get that same 20% bump, right? I've now made $1 million off of the fact that I own those 5 houses, of nothing else. I mean, plus time, right? Because I had exposure to the market. And now markets fluctuate, right? So sometimes it will go down, right? Sometimes my 5 houses, what was it? 5? Sometimes my houses will go up in value. Sometimes they'll go down in value. They will both impact my net worth. I will be worth less when the houses are worth less and more when the houses are worth more. But on average, the market tends to trend upwards, right? So on average, if you're in a good market, especially a good market with strong fundamentals, the price is going to trend upwards, right? And so the more properties you have, the more assets you have, the more holdings you have, the more exposure you get to that upside and downside, and therefore the more returns you can get, right? To put it another way, if you've ever been to like a sporting event, you buy like a 50-50 ticket, right? 50-50 ticket is half the money goes to them, half the money gets put in the pot for you to win. And they always allow you to buy more than one 50-50 ticket, right? So you can buy one ticket, and then you have one shot out of you and the, let's say, 100,000 people who also buy a ticket. So you have a $100,000 shot. Or you can buy 1,000 tickets. Now you have 1,000 in a 100,000 shot. So 1,000 out of 100,000 is actually a 1 in 100 chance. So you've improved your odds from 1 in 100,000 to 1 in 1,000. That's an order of magnitude improvement, right? Now, that's a very, very bad strategy. Unless you're feeling charitable, buying that many tickets seems stupid. And I don't know what the odds are. They're probably worse than how I'm illustrating them. But, right, we all understand conceptually that the more tickets you buy, the better your odds are of winning the pot, right? Your average person does not carry that wisdom over to investing, right? The more assets you hold, the better the chance that one or some of them will hit the jackpot or skyrocket. But also, on average, they will all increase a little bit slowly over time. So unlike waiting or hoping for the jackpot, real estate's almost, and not just real estate, stocks too, almost guaranteed, almost, not guaranteed, but almost guaranteed to go up in the longer term, right? And that's something that we really have to consider. And just to carry that analogy just a little bit further, in the longer term, the more assets that you can allocate, right, the more wealth that you can get. And this is very true of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, if you look at how they behave and how they got to be as wealthy as they are. The more that you can have in terms of assets and wealth, then the less each spending unit means to you, right? When you were a child and you had no income, $5 was a small fortune. Certainly $50 was, right? And when you became an adult and you got a good job, suddenly $50 or $100 became not worth as much to you as that $5 was worth when you were a kid, right? Because it's much easier to replace, and it's a much smaller proportion of your overall wealth, right? So that principle holds true, right? When you are, quote unquote, an average Canadian, let's say, living on $60,000 a year or what have you, with $5,000 savings in the bank, which I think is actually above average in terms of the savings figure. But when you're that person, $100,000 is a lot of money to you, right? If you are an investor who's been investing for 10, 15 years and saving and being responsible, you might have, $1.5 million dollars in total assets, or maybe more. And so now that $100,000, still a lot of money, still a lot of money to you, but it's not the same as the $100,000 to the person who only has $100,000, or to the person who only has $5,000, right? It's worth a lot less to you. And now that those sums of money become worth less to you, it means you can bet them, you can risk them on riskier ventures because they don't mean as much to you, right? It's one thing to buy a lottery ticket for $5 on the hopes that you'll win, 70 million. It's another thing to buy a lottery ticket for $100 hoping the same thing, right? The economics are very different because you care substantially less about $5 than about $100. So if you throw away $5 on the chance to win, that's fine, right? Similarly, if I go to the stock market and I have $100,000 to my name, I want to make sure that all of the stocks I buy are going to pay me a return and be relatively safe and risk-free because this is all the money I have in the world. But if I have $1 million, maybe I get a hot stock tip. Somebody says, hey, throw $10,000 at this stock at this time. They're releasing this new product that's going to rock the world and blah, 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 blah. And I can do that now because I'm not so worried about the money. And now that's how you get these stories of people who, they buy a stock or they buy a house or something and they 10x their money and they this and they that because they become less risk averse, right? As their assets under management increase, right? They become less risk averse. They're more willing to take some chances. I can put $10,000 here and $10,000 there on these long shots that, maybe aren't so guaranteed to pay me a return, but I don't need the return as much. So I'll gamble on them 10xing. And if they do, I end up way ahead. And obviously, you see how that math works. Let's just say we'll make a $10,000 bet on some stock 10xing, right? Well, I can bet $100,000 in $10,000 increments on something 10xing. And as long as 1 out of 10 does, I end up breaking even. If 2 out of 10 do, I end up ahead. Right? So that's how the math works out. So you start to do that, or investors start to do that. And so they're able to accumulate and snowball their wealth. Right? So that's something that should be kept in mind. Right? So now we've got average rents that have increased, and investors who are pursuing cash flow are pretty happy because this is looking really good for them. As we look forward into the market, we have a lot of price uncertainty, both around interest rates and just around sort of the instability of the market in general. And so investors are sitting there looking for opportunities to continue generating cash flow. There are always, right, if the price is right, if the numbers are right, then you'll have cash flow. And those deals always exist. They are easier and harder to negotiate at different times in the business cycle. And right now is not a particularly easy time to find those deals, but they do exist, depending on the markets you're in and what you're looking for. And there is a lot of money to be made by buying those and holding on to them and being prudent and kind of making safe investment decisions. So for me, I would encourage people to go out into the market, look at what's available to them, and look for those cash flowing properties, right? Even if it cash flows $100 a month, right? The goal here is not necessarily to get rich off of your cash flow, although that is certainly a good laudable goal. The goal is to find assets that cash flow so that they can sustain themselves through hard times like these ones, so that you can realize the appreciation and income from cash flow in the future, right? Because you can start building up income from assets, $1,000, $1,200 at a time, right? And as you do so, you'll acquire more and more cash flow, but also your assets under management or owned assets will also increase, right? And eventually that starts to snowball out of control. Yeah, so the recession is probably here, and it's probably going to get worse. It's probably going to be pretty bad for some people. And that is really sad. Obviously, everybody now wishes the government didn't do what it did. Very few people were singing that tune a year and a half, 2 years ago, when they started this foolishness. And it's been very disappointing to see how eagerly people have invited government interference into their lives, but it's understandable. People don't want to be responsible for themselves, so if they can put it off on somebody else, they will, and that's ultimately the government's. That's what it exists for, right? It's there to take responsibility for things people don't want to. Sort of. I mean, it's there for a lot of reasons. The history of how and why we have governments is a complex thing, but essentially it's there to take responsibility for things that we otherwise don't want to, or at least that's how we use it in the modern world. So that's what people have been doing. And it really doesn't work with anything, but it works better with some things than with others. A great example is garbage collection. The government's not very good at collecting garbage. They do it very expensively, and if we had to pay for it privately, it would probably be cheaper, although it would all cost us time out of our lives to, sign garbage contracts and stuff like that. But the government, even though they don't necessarily do it all that well, none of us loses sleep over the fact that the government's in control of the garbage collection contract, because the cost premium to each of us that we pay in taxes, A, we don't know this because the taxes are stolen from us, but B, it just doesn't matter that much. Now, yes, there are waste management companies who are much more profitable than they should be because of all the government waste that they're able to collect. But, it is what it is. That's kind of the world we live in, right? The general inefficiency of government works fine for garbage collection because it's just not that important, but it doesn't work well for your financial planning. It doesn't work well. I mean, first of all, the government can't even financially plan itself, right? I don't understand why people would trust an entity that is never financially responsible. That's the strangest thing to come out of all of this. Is the government never balances its books. It's in perpetual deficit, and when it's not in the deficit, it's still in perpetual debt. Like, even on those few years, and they are few if you look at the record, where the government is not deficit spending, it's still in crazy, crazy debt. So you point me to the individual that you would take advice from who is in crippling debt, like their debt service payments are 80% of their income or higher. No, I guess our government's not in that bad of a spot yet, but maybe 50% of their income, somewhere in that range. And on the months or years where they don't spend more money than they make, they barely manage to service the debt. So there are years where basically their debt remains the same, and there are years where their debt grows, but there are no years where their debt shrinks. Is this a person that you're coming to for financial advice? The answer, I would hope, is no. And yet, for some reason, people let the government tell them how they should live their lives and what they should do with their finances all the time, even though it's by definition the least responsible, most decadent, least accountable entity or organization in existence. So it's a very bizarre thing people do. Anyways, I'm going to call the seminar here a little bit early, but I don't want to ramble on too long. I don't have any properties I want to look at this week. I have been looking at some more detailed sales numbers. Thank you to shoutouts to Elias, who's been providing me with some listings, some off-market listings and their listing history. And it is pretty clear that prices have fallen quite significantly over the last year or so. Properties, being listed multiple times with multiple price cuts and still not moving, things like that. Which, I mean, sucks for those people selling the houses. To me, it seems great because I don't want to sell the houses I have and I'd like to buy more. So if prices can keep falling, that works for me. Obviously, there has to be some balance. There's that give and take where it's, prices are falling in absolute terms. And if you're buying these properties with cash, then you're receiving a fantastic discount. Since your average buyer is financing, these discounts don't really amount to much because yes, you're paying less on the property, but you're paying more on the mortgage and interest rates, and it's basically a wash, right? The value that the seller is losing is being accrued by the bank with the higher interest rates, right? Well, and technically by the government because that's who's behind that. And so that's something that's a little problematic, right? As we watch the prices fall, it's not necessarily actually getting the individual retail buyer ahead. But if you have access to cash, if you can fundraise, if you can crowdsource, if you can raise capital in one of a number of ways that does not require you to pay the prevailing interest rate, then there are cash deals available where you're going to do really, really well on price. And we'll have to see just how far those prices fall and how aggressive that is. I know there are definitely professional and some amateurish, but this is probably more a pro investor move. There are some pro investors who are currently fundraising, right? They're raising capital, they're building up war chest in anticipation that, over the next 6 to 18 months or so, we're going to kind of hit the bottom of this housing market correction. And that'll be a fantastic time for them to buy, right? Buy the dip, take a nice 30% discount. Something that people should be aware of if they're not aware of. Thank you, government manipulation. When everything was shut down during COVID, Toronto condo prices fell, both rental and sale price. So the numbers based on market rents, right, from the same article and the same CMHC numbers, Toronto condo rental numbers are up 46% year on year. So from the bottom of the crash where nobody wanted a condo and nobody wanted to rent them because of COVID to now, the price has risen 46% on rent. So if you were renting out your condo for, $1,500, you're now renting it out for $2,250, something like that, which is a huge increase. So that's a perfect example, right, where things dip and then they recover. And it didn't take forever to happen. It took a year, right? Now that's a manipulated market. Obviously, it's not usual for the government to lock everybody in their homes to shut things down and make it so that those types of homes are just crazy undesirable in the short term. But that's what happened. So that's what the rebound looked like. That 46% increase is obviously means that, if there were people who went out with cash when those properties were really cheap and they bought a bunch of them, even if they were leveraged, right? Even if they owed 10% interest on that cash, well, 46% increase. So you could afford to pay for all of that, and they did really, really well. Had to have balls of steel, right? Because who wanted to buy and hold a bunch of condos, when it looked like maybe the condo market won't recover, because who knows how bad this COVID fear response is going to get. But there you have it. Whoever it was, if there were people, I don't know anyone who did that, but I'm sure there were some people who were, smarter than the rest of us, or crazier. They did very, very, very well for themselves, right? So, again, on average, were people hurt by that? I don't know. It's very hard to say. I'm sure there are plenty of retail investors who own condos, sold them in a panic, worried that, COVID would never end. This was new normal, blah, 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 blah. And, a year or two later, now that those 46% increases have been realized, those people are kicking themselves. Maybe they lost money on the deal. Probably they sold it at a profit, but they could have been higher, and that just is what it is. That's the name of the game, right? So we're all trying to be in the market as much as we can, and trying not to let emotion dictate decisions, right? You should really have a price, have a number. If you get your price, you sell. If you don't, you don't, right? And that's pretty straightforward. It should very much be like a stock, right? When you buy a stock, you usually have an exit in mind, right? I'm going to buy, I don't know, Google. It's not even a stock anymore, but I'm going to buy Google for $100. If somebody offers me $150 for it, it's all theirs, right? Really simple. And yeah, you know what? Even if you know that Google is eventually going to become Alphabet and turn into $1,000 stock, right? If you get your 50% increase, you sell. You can always buy more and say, hey, I'll buy some more at 150 and sell it for 2, right? But you kind of have your price and your target set, and you go, and maybe you don't end up with buying and selling, whatever, as the market evolves and you reevaluate. But that's really how you go into these things, because that way it's not emotion that's making the decision. It's not how you feel. It's here's my line. I made my money. Let's go, right? And hey, if you make 50% on every deal and every trade, you'll end up very, very well off, right? So it's not like you have to sit there and worry about, hey, I could have got 75%. 50% will do if you can do it consistently. 10%, even like 5 or 7% will make you spectacularly wealthy over the course of your lifetime if you can consistently see those returns. And the statistics from the last century or so are very, very clear that the 7% you can get from the stock market, the 10% you can get from real estate, these are returns that you can rely upon by and large, and they will over time make you wealthy, right? And that's getting rich slowly. And once you've gotten rich slowly, you can get rich quickly. Like I said, because the money matters less to you, and you can bet more. You can be a bit more risky, right? And hope for that 10x stock, or that that flip of a property that just triples your money and that kind of thing. So again, thank you for joining me. Thank you for your time. I wish you all the best out there in this market. I definitely think it's a time where, for the most part, most of the people who might listen to this are not going to be looking to buy right now. Probably sit on the sidelines and wait it out. But I wanted to talk about why you can't live your life on the sidelines, and how important it is to get into the market and start assuming that you're buying things that you're not going to have to take out of the market. The market will eventually work for you, even if it doesn't in the short term. So again, thank you, and have a fantastic day. If anyone has any questions, now's the time. Otherwise, hopefully I will see you next week.